Here are two words that you've definitely heard a bunch throughout the pandemic: Great Resignation. And that's for a good reason. In a recent survey, 42% of Canadian employees said they're considering changing their job or their entire career.
It feels like that's a huge number, Jess. So here to break down what exactly the Great Resignation means for Canadians and also how we might use it to our advantage, our good friend, CTV's chief financial commentator, Pattie Lovett Reid. Welcome back, Pattie.
Hi, both of you. Hi.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time, but we got a lot to ask you. First of all, break it down for us. A lot of people have been hearing Great Resignation over the last few years. What does it mean exactly?
I think what's happening, and it's probably happened more south of the border than here in Canada, but I can tell you it's happening here in Canada. What you're finding is people are questioning how they work, where they work, in some cases, even why they're working. And so we're seeing voluntary resignations across all sectors. If you look at where we were in 2019 before the pandemic to where we are now, I would say many organizations are losing twice as many people because they're opting out. They're looking for alternatives.
What are the main reasons, Pattie, that we're seeing this in such high numbers?
Well, some may feel forgotten working from home. Others want to climb the corporate ladder. There may be a conflict with their boss. Working through a pandemic, a lot of people realize some of the things that they love to do may not be what they're doing every day. And so they're exploring new options.
So there is a negative side, obviously, of the Great Resignation because it just seems like so many people are not happy at their jobs. But you say there is a bright side. You say that this is an ideal time for people to take that leap because so many companies are hiring right now. What's your top advice for people who are thinking, you know what, I'm going to rethink this entire career path thing right now?
You know what? I think you've got to start with putting in the work to really understand who you are. I mean, we all have great strengths. Sometimes we don't always know what they are. And we can have a passion as well. But it's not enough to just say, I get excited about this and I know I'm good at it. Can you actually make a living at it? And so I do think this term, war for talent, there is a war for talent. There is a war out there, getting the right people in the right jobs to help drive the strategy forward. But your job is to figure out what you're really encoded to do. What are your great strengths? And if you decide to go for a job interview, you've got to make sure your strengths and your passion line up to the actual position. They're not going to figure it out if you don't tell them.
Pattie, it takes a certain financial privilege to be able to leave your job when you're unhappy, especially because it feels like not all of these people are leaving without a backup plan, without a new job in place. So how can someone with less financial flexibility also take advantage of this time?
Well, I do think it's always easier in many cases to find a job when you have a job. But what we also know is that really great people have lost their jobs throughout the pandemic through no fault of their own. And so they're forced to look. So I always suggest to people that 3 to 6 months living expenses set aside for an emergency. And by the way, in some cases, people have to leave. Their health is at risk. They can't continue doing what they're doing. They've got to make a change. Now, if you don't have the 3 to 6 months living expenses tucked aside, before you take the leap, I would suggest you get a line of credit from your financial institution or a credit card that you don't use unless you absolutely need to, so that you have it for that emergency situation. But yes, it always helps if you have the financial freedom to make the choices that you want to make.
Pattie, people's needs have shifted a lot over the pandemic. 43% of Canadians have said they'd look for a new job if they're forced to return to the office full time. So for people who are seeking a more flexible workplace post-pandemic, when is the right time to make these requests in the job interview process? What's the best way to bring it up?
I love that. And you don't bring it up. Okay, I'm not saying you never bring it up, but people will negotiate against themselves. They'll go into an interview. They don't even know if they're the right candidate. And they will say, I want to work from home. I want more vacation. I'd like a better salary. You don't even know what the starting salary is. And so I think you've got to sort of stand back, be patient. And by the way, even before you decide to take that leap of faith, if you're unhappy where you are, you owe it to yourself and maybe your organization if you love your job, but maybe not your boss or maybe not the environment, to have a conversation. Never threaten, never ever threaten. It's like, dating and you threaten to leave. Yeah, we'll go ahead and leave or whatever. You know what I mean? That's not the best analogy, but you know where I'm coming from. Threats never work, but neither does negotiating against yourself.
And let's go further there. You were just already hinting to it. So let's say you decide, you know what, before I take the leap and I leave, maybe I can improve the situation where I'm currently working. And you think, okay, maybe I should go talk to my boss. How do you suggest someone does that to see if they can improve things? Or is that just possibly going to burn a bridge?
I think it's all in how you approach it, Mel. I think it's a really good idea. You may not understand or fully appreciate all the pressures that the organization may be facing. So maybe you speak to someone who you trust, like it could be a human resource representative that might have more insight. I don't think you go forward in the middle of a pandemic necessarily or in the middle of a crisis. I think you try to figure out what is good timing and have an open and honest conversation. I always like to approach things, how can I help you to do your job better? And so how can I help the team move forward on the strategic initiatives that the organization wants? Not necessarily what I want. If they are misaligned, then I have to make a decision. But until I really understand it, sometimes, again, you're just guessing.
Okay, so you get to that point and you ask yourself that question, should I stay or should I go? How do you know? How do you know?
How do you know? Okay, so here's what always has worked for me. If I wasn't being paid for what I'm doing, would I still get excited about it and still want to do it? And if I do, yes, I always will find that that's what excites me. That's what's going to keep me going. I mean, it's ridiculous to say you're not going to be paid, but it is a good question to ask yourself.
Yeah, and how? So new research suggests that a lot of Canadians are thinking about quitting their jobs once the pandemic is over and they've seen how their employer adapts to the new normal. It's a different world. So does this mean that we haven't seen the end of the resignation wave yet?
I actually don't think we necessarily have. I think we're still finding our way, how we're going to work, who is it going to work for, who isn't it going to work for. Now more than ever, communication is going to be key. And I think you can be in the driver's seat. So my advice, give it a shot, but do the work on yourself first. Know who you are, what you want, and then go get it.
Glad we're sitting on couches because we just went to therapy with Pattie Lovett Reid.
You're so good.
Oh, that was great. Pattie, always great to have your insight as well.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna